down for a picture now?
Yeah.
Get out the street, man.
Give me the phone, I'll take one of you both. Together, no?
Kel, what you think, man? I mean, this was supposed to be your fight, right?
Supposed to be, but I've had to come to New York. I've had to come here for Crawford now.
Yes, sir. There you go.
There you go.
Terrence Allen Crawford, Ezekiel KELL Brooke. This Saturday, Saturday night on regular ESPN. All right. So part of the undercard will be on ESPN Plus beginning at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And the main card will be on regular ESPN beginning at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern. All right. Live from Las Vegas. So, and make sure you check out the weigh-in on Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern. All right. Not only are they going to have the weigh-in, they're going to have predictions from the so-called experts. And then the Max Kellerman segment where he goes one-on-one with both of the guys. And much more on Friday as part of the weigh-in show. And, of course, you'll get to hear Timothy Bradley Jr. and Andre Ward disagree, which is one of my favorite parts every time a top-ranked card comes on. Did you see the stare down at the final press conference they had Wednesday? If you didn't, go to Top Rank Boxing's YouTube page and check it out. You can watch the press conference, or you can go to the short version if you just want to look at the stare down. The short video on Top Rank Boxing's YouTube channel is the title is Terence Crawford and KELL Brooke starting talking, won't separate, and then something else. So if I can remember, I'll leave that video below. And also I'll look for a link to leave below to the weigh-in for those who don't have ESPN or who might be at work or whatever and want to watch it. Also, we might cover that. We'll see. All right. Terence Crawford reminds me of Gennady Golovkin, or Triple G, or GGG, as many people refer to him. Golovkin was undefeated and terrorizing people, just as Crawford. But they weren't the names people wanted because they were unfamiliar with prior competition. And as the names got better, Golovkin delivered. The catch is people waited Golovkin out. They waited until he got old, and he still beat guys. But now that he's ancient, he's beyond old. I mean, the man is ancient. Now other fighters are using his name, saying they'd fight him in a heartbeat. Yeah, of course. He's old and slow and beatable now. Mind you, the Golovkin you first saw on HBO, as well as Chocolatito for that matter, they were guys who were already past their primes a bit. So what you saw wasn't even the prime fighter. Now, if you follow them before that, then you notice, you know the real deal. Well, Crawford is another guy that they are waiting out. He'll be 34 years old on his next birthday, and the clock is ticking. He's no longer in his physical boxing prime, but he's still a dog. Don't get it confused. Let's say like a Michael Jordan as he got older. Crawford is going to have to change his game a bit, and the physicality that he could use in the past, he's going to have to use that chess playing mind of his that he's done in past fights. We've seen it. You've seen it. He'll give away 1 or 2 or 3, sometimes 4 rounds as he kind of collects data on his opponent. So he'll have to do that. And if he was still at 140 pounds, I would say the same thing. But specifically now, not being as big as the other welterweights, he's not going to be able to physically. He can do things physically when he gets in a groove and lands some shots and gets opponents on the defensive. But overall, he's not going to be able to just go in there and come forward and walk guys down. And that's fine, because the preference would be for him to fight the chess way of doing things. So, and he'll have to do that in this fight because he's in there with a physical specimen. All right, let's not get Kell Brook confused with the Kell Brook who fought Errol Spence Jr. Post Golovkin. All right, if you go back and look at Golovkin versus Brook, Brook was huge at the 30-day weigh-in, bigger than Golovkin, but not fat. I mean, he was ripped, right? And then at the 10-day weigh-in, he was bigger than Golovkin. Then on fight night, he was the bigger man, and he fought his heart out. But then that animal came out, and Golovkin stopped him. That animal, that triple G, that GGG. And so he stopped Brook, but more importantly, he broke Brook's orbital bone. Now, those aforementioned factors played part in Kell's fight with Spence Jr. Hear me out. When Kell Brook decided to come back after losing to Golovkin and move back down 2 weight classes to welterweight, that's extremely tough to do when you go down 2 weight classes. Whether it's going down for the sake of going down, or whether it's I moved up, took a fight, and then went back down. You're not going to find too many people who's successful in doing it. Ask Thomas Hearns. Ask Chris Bird. Hearns is the only one I remember, and he did go back down, if I recall it correctly, and he won one fight, but then he got knocked out in the next fight. So it's tough to do. I won't even mention Chris Bird, who's making a comeback, by the way. And Chris, when he moved down from heavyweight, bypassed cruiserweight and went straight to light heavy, he got stopped by a guy who, he's my guy. Don't get me wrong, but he's Bird. He's not on Bird's level, and so when Kell fought Spence, he used a majority of his camp not to train, not to spar, but to lose weight. And you never want to use a camp. You never want to use a camp just to make weight. Ask Adrian Broner. Ask James Toney. They'll tell you. Eventually what happens is your body is going to betray you at some point in the fight. So if you recall, Brook was fighting very well against Spence Jr. and he had the lead going into the final rounds. But slowly but surely, his body began to betray him. And don't get me wrong, Spence Jr. did well going to the body in an effort to slow him down. But the body betrayal started before then in that fight. Brook was up on many people's cards, but eventually he had to take a knee in the 10th. And then he took another knee later in the 10th. And then he was stopped around later in the 11th. Now, using camp to make weight is not the recipe for success as a fighter. In my opinion, had KELL Brook fought at 147 where he was and left the Golovkin fight alone, maybe the outcome with Spence Jr. would have been different. Maybe it wouldn't have been, but I like his chances a lot better had he done it that way. Reason being, if he got to the 11th round after coming down to make weight, in the Spence fight, then I suspect things would have been better if he stayed at welterweight from the beginning and had his showdown with Spence. Remember, Brook took the fight with Golovkin as a replacement opponent after Golovkin's initial opponent, whose name is not worth mentioning, punked out. We'll just leave it at that. We'll call it, because that's pretty much what it was. So, and then remember, Brook's body betrayed him in another way, not just the weight loss. After having his orbital bone broken against Golovkin, he should have appealed to the IBF to ask for more time, more recovery time before he fought Spence. Instead, he fought Spence Jr., I think like a half year later or so, like 6 months, something like that. Don't quote me, but I know it wasn't a year. I know it wasn't 9 months. I don't think it was 8 months. I think it was like 6 months later, something like that. But because I remember saying, I don't know. So, just based on reading about that particular injury. So, he had surgery on the orbital bone, Golovkin fractured. He fights Spence, and then the other orbital bone is broken. Now, I'm not a doctor, but both orbital bones are connected by something called the orbital plate. So there's like a picture a scale. And so you have or seesaw. So you have the part one person sits on, the part the other person sits on, and then you have the connector, that line that goes across from one seat to the other. Well, that would be the equivalent to the orbital plate. The connectivity means as one heals, it still affects the other if it hasn't fully healed. A domino effect, if you will. So when Brook got stopped and we found out it was the other orbital bone, we realized he was damaged goods from the first fight and should have taken more time off. Consequently, another surgery for Brook. So after losing to Spence, he got the message and he took just about a year off. And then he came back and fought and got back in the win column with a knockout. Okay, so he's won 3 in a row. And he last fought earlier this year. So maybe that helps him in this fight, because Crawford's last fight was last year, late last year, and he was knocked down in that fight. So will Crawford be sharp? We don't know. Will his age continue to show a bit? We'll see. But that's what boxing has become these days. Back in the 60s or 70s or 80s, or even 90s, Crawford and Spence would probably be negotiating their third fight by now. Real talk. It's just not that way anymore. And I think most of us know why. You know, I've been vocal since June of about the upsets that have happened in the bubble. I predicted it back in June, and it's happened numerous times. There's nothing like big fights with fans. And I don't think a lot of fights would have played out the same way as they have this year had fans been allowed. It's just a difference. For some fighters, at least. And so I'm looking at a lot of Facebook posts and Twitter posts all calling for the upset this weekend. So I'll go back to what I said earlier in this video. The KELL Brook Terence Crawford will face on Saturday is not the same guy who fought Errol Spence Jr. This KELL Brook will be well rested. He's absolutely chiseled. Didn't have to use an entire camp to make weight because he was where he needed to be. And he's riding a win streak. Yes, he's a couple of years older than the guy who lost back-to-back. No shame in losing to Spence Jr. or Golovkin. But I look at KELL as being a couple of years wiser to go along with being older. And he's passionate about this fight. Check out the video when I bumped into KELL walking the streets of New York. And he was in town hoping that Crawford beat Khan. And he told me he wanted him next. Well, now he has his shot. As I'm talking, I may put the video in the front of this. If so, you've already seen it, or you can go back and see it. Or I might put it at the end. But it was funny because when I bumped into KELL, he was like 8 blocks away from Madison Square Garden, but not going the way most people go when they're 8 blocks away. He was like going this other direction. It's hard to explain unless you walk the streets of Manhattan. But here's his shot. He's been passionate about it way back then. Well, not way back then. It was, a couple years ago when Crawford fought Khan. But let's not forget, KELL Brook only has those 2 losses we mentioned. Let's also not forget he beat Sean Porter, who I thought beat Errol Spence Jr. Joshua Franco versus Andrew Maloney rematch is also on this card. Joshua Greer Jr. is on the card, and Tyler Howard in separate fights. But make no mistake, KELL Brook has wanted this fight since April of last year at the latest, that's the day I saw him on the streets. So when fighters go after a fight so passionately, and he wanted Crawford prior to this, but when guys go after this, like big time fights with this much passion, I expect them to bring the best they've got. Okay? David Haye notwithstanding. I expect a good fight on Saturday night. I expect Crawford to have to go through some fire to pull out a win. Brook is going to use his jab and his size to try to come forward. He's a big, strong welterweight. And if you recall how Porter tried to muscle him a few years back, but he couldn't. KELL made it a little harder for him. KELL's strong, and Sean, I think, knew KELL was strong, but I don't know if he knew KELL was that strong. So a lot of holding and grabbing and so on and so forth. But he couldn't muscle him. And KELL probably should have been deducted for the clutching, for the holding, but nevertheless, He's got a solid chin. He's got speed and power to take you out. So this is a very dangerous fight for Crawford, and he better not be looking ahead. Guys, you know when everybody wants a particular fight and a guy fights someone dangerous, who's just very dangerous, and then they kind of lose looking forward. And that's the sentiment of a lot of people who I've just looked at various posts that they've left. They think the upset's coming. And I don't know if it's related to this bubble thing or what, but a lot of people think it's coming. I think it may be they don't think as highly as others do about Crawford. I'll look at it that way. Also, Crawford, his contract with Top Rank Boxing expires, I believe, in a few months. And once again, when you always hear guys, well, they'll say something like, I got one more fight at this weight, and then I'm going to move up. I just want one more, and then they wind up losing. You hear guys like, yeah, everybody knows the fight they want, and after I finish my business with this fight, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can make and then they lose. Now it's like, oh, well, I got, this will probably be the last fight under my contract, and then I'll weigh my options. And right when they say things like that, it's like, man, you were ready to accept all offers, and then you lost. And then some of those offers disappear. So Crawford's got to be careful. And Brook is coming in here with, he's ready. He's been wanting this. So he's energized. He is ripped, too. I don't know if you saw some of the videos and pictures of him. And he's going to fight like it's nothing to lose. And there is nothing to lose. Boy, what else? So this is Brook's moment, like I said, and he knows it. And he knows it may be his last moment or opportunity, I should say. So he's going to go for it. For this fight, he'll have a new trainer, and many speculate that could be his downfall. Listen, Kell knows how to fight at this point. And maybe the new guy can give him some new looks that Crawford isn't expecting. We'll see. Remember, Tyson Fury changed trainers, and, well, you see what happened the next time out with him, right? Okay. So also on Saturday, there's a card on Sky Sports and DAZN. Katie Taylor in the argument as one of the best women's, or the best women's boxer. She's already one of the best, arguably the best. Terry Harper, they co-headline a card that'll be on earlier in the day on Saturday. So if women's boxing is your thing, go for it. All right, so make sure you check out the weigh-in on Friday. Starts at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And Max on Boxing, the Max Kellerman thing, where he'll interview both guys one-on-one. And then the so-called expert opinion on who they think will win, including Timothy Bradley Jr., Mark Kriegel, Andre Ward. Was it Joe Tessitore this time, or Papa? I'm not sure if it's Papa or Tessitore, but so check that out. It's always fun to hear people give their predictions and then break down why they chose what they do. I'm all in for Bradley and Ward. I like when they disagree. 90% of the time, I take Timothy Bradley Jr.'s side of the argument, but I agreed with Ward with his scorecard a few weeks ago for that Lomachenko and Lopez. So I always get a kick out of those guys going back and forth. So hopefully they'll be in rare form on Friday and Saturday. And that's about it. Go to Top Rank Boxing's channel and check out that stare down. It seemed like it lasted about 3 minutes. And we catch you later.